I never thought a snowstorm would turn my quiet little neighborhood into a courtroom drama. But that is exactly what happened when my neighbor showed up at my front door demanding $1,800 for damage he claimed my car caused. The funny part, and I mean the kind of funny that only becomes funny after you stop being angry, was that my car had not moved in 2 days. It was still sitting in my driveway, buried under a thick blanket of snow like it was trying to disappear from the world. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and I had lived in Maple Ridge, Colorado for almost 12 years. It was the kind of neighborhood where people waved while checking their mail, where everyone knew whose dog escaped every summer, and where the biggest argument usually involved someone leaving their trash bins out too long. At least, that was how it used to be. Then came the winter storm that changed everything. It started on a Friday night with light snow, the kind that makes everything look peaceful. But by midnight it had turned into something completely different. The wind picked up. The snow started coming down sideways, and by morning our street looked like someone had dropped a giant white blanket over the entire neighborhood. Cars were covered, sidewalks disappeared, and the road looked like a frozen tunnel between walls of snow. I remember sitting by my kitchen window that morning, holding a mug of coffee with both hands, watching the city plow slowly crawl through the streets. There was something strangely calming about it, seeing those giant machines move through the storm, clearing a path while everyone else stayed inside. I had no idea that one of those plows was about to become the center of a ridiculous accusation. Around 10 in the morning, while I was still enjoying my quiet morning, someone started pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. When I opened it, there stood my neighbor, Marcus Bell, looking like he had already decided I was guilty of something before I even said hello. He was in his late 50s, always perfectly dressed, always convinced he knew more than everyone else on the block. Marcus had never been openly hostile toward me, but he had this habit of turning every small thing into a competition. If my garden looked good, his had to look better. If I replaced my fence, he somehow needed a more expensive one. It was never about the thing itself. It was about proving he was the person who had control. That morning, he was holding several printed photographs in one hand, and his gloves were still covered with snow. "You see this?" he said immediately, pushing the pictures toward me. I looked down and saw images of cracked concrete near his driveway and torn up grass along the edge of his property. "Your car caused this," he said. I honestly thought I had misunderstood him. "My car?" I asked. "Marcus, my car hasn't moved since Friday night." He shook his head like I was insulting his intelligence. "Don't do that, Ethan. I know what happened. You parked too close to the curb. The plow had to move around you, and now my property is damaged." I looked over my shoulder at my driveway. My SUV was still sitting there exactly where I left it, with snow piled halfway up the doors. "You realize the car is still covered in snow, right?" I said. "That doesn't prove anything," he replied. "I've already contacted the city. I gave them your license plate number. They said you could be responsible for repairs. $1,800 should cover it." The way he said it bothered me more than the accusation itself. He was not asking. He was announcing a verdict, like he had already decided the story and was just waiting for everyone else to accept it. I tried to explain that the damage clearly looked like something caused by the plow, not a parked vehicle. But Marcus was not interested in a conversation. He turned around, walked back through the snow, and left wet footprints across my porch without even saying goodbye. I stood there for a few seconds, still holding my coffee, trying to understand how quickly a normal winter morning had turned into this. The strange thing was, I wasn't even angry at first. I was confused, because deep down, I knew something did not add up. My driveway was untouched. My tire tracks were buried under fresh snow. There was no possible way my vehicle had been on the street when that damage happened. But Marcus was confident, and sometimes confidence can make a lie look like the truth for a little while. I figured the city would look at the facts and move on. I thought maybe someone had just made a mistake. I was wrong. A week later, I opened my mailbox and found a thick envelope waiting for me. Inside was a civil claim filed by Marcus Bell, officially demanding payment for the damage in front of his house. I actually laughed when I read it. Not because it was funny, but because it was so unbelievable that my brain didn't know how else to react. Someone had taken a simple accident involving a snowplow and somehow built an entire case around blaming me. That was the moment I stopped thinking this was just a neighbor disagreement. I picked up my phone and called an attorney. When I called my attorney, Laura Whitman, the first thing she did was listen without interrupting. which honestly was one of the reasons I hired her in the first place. She had this calm way of making chaos feel smaller. I remember sitting in her office with Marcus's claim spread across the desk, and she just read through it slowly, page by page, while I kept waiting for her to say something like, "This is ridiculous." But she didn't. She just kept reading, making notes, and occasionally shaking her head. Finally, she looked up and said, "Ethan, I have seen people argue over property lines, fences, trees, and parking spaces. But this one is interesting. Your neighbor isn't just saying you caused damage. He's saying he has proof." I leaned back in my chair and sighed. "The proof is a picture of damage I didn't cause." Laura nodded. "Exactly. And that's where facts matter." She explained something that stuck with me throughout the whole process. A picture can show what happened, but it doesn't always show why it happened. And Marcus had built his entire argument around making everyone believe the second part. He had the damage. He had the photos. He had confidence. What he didn't have was the truth. Over the next few weeks, I started seeing a different side of Marcus. Before this happened, I thought he was just a difficult neighbor, someone who liked being right a little too much. But after the claim was filed, I started hearing stories from other people on the street. The woman across from him told me Marcus had complained about her driveway lights because he thought they were too bright. Another neighbor mentioned that he had once argued with the city over a tree placement for almost 6 months. Nobody disliked him enough to start a fight. But everyone had the same reaction when they heard about my situation. They all said some version of the same thing. "That sounds like Marcus." And that was when I realized this wasn't really about the damaged curb. It was about control. Marcus wanted to be the person who decided what happened, even when reality disagreed with him. The court hearing was scheduled for a month later. During that time, I tried to move on with my life, but it was hard. Every time I looked outside and saw my driveway, I thought about how strange the whole situation was. I wasn't worried about paying the money. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. What bothered me was the idea that someone could point at an innocent person, tell a convincing story, and expect everyone to accept it. There is something unsettling about being accused of something you didn't do, especially when the person accusing you sounds completely certain. The day of the hearing, I arrived early. The courthouse was quiet, the kind of quiet where every footstep echoes. I remember sitting there, watching people walk in and out, thinking about how many ordinary disagreements eventually end up in these rooms because two people can't agree on what really happened. Then Marcus walked in, and I have to admit, he looked confident, almost too confident. He walked into that courtroom carrying the same folder of photographs he had shown me at my door. He had the same expression, the same attitude, like this was just another situation where he would explain the facts and everyone would immediately understand. He sat down, looked over at me, and gave me a small smile, not a friendly smile. The kind of smile someone gives when they think they already won. When the hearing began, Marcus went first. He stood up and explained everything exactly the way he had explained it to me. According to him, I had parked improperly, forcing the snow plow to move around my vehicle, which caused the damage near his driveway. He held up the photographs dramatically and pointed toward me. "Her vehicle caused all of this damage," he told the judge. "You can clearly see the tire marks and the path it took." I looked over at Laura, and she was completely calm. That actually made me feel better because I knew she was not distracted by the performance. She wasn't focused on emotion. She was focused on evidence. Marcus finished his explanation and sat down, looking satisfied. The judge looked through the photos carefully. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then Laura stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a big speech. She simply walked closer to the judge and asked one question. "Mr. Elias, Bell claims these marks were made by my client's vehicle, correct?" The judge nodded. Laura looked back at Marcus. "Then I have one question. If this was caused by her vehicle, how does he explain the fact that these tracks continue for nearly half a block past his house without interruption?" The entire courtroom went silent. It was one of those moments where you could almost hear someone's confidence disappear. Marcus's face changed slightly, not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. His mouth opened like he was preparing to answer, but nothing came out, because that was the problem with his story. It only worked if nobody looked too closely. Laura returned to the table and opened a folder. "Your Honor, we requested additional records from the city." Marcus suddenly looked less comfortable. "What records?" he asked. Laura didn't look at him. She looked at the judge. "The snowplow GPS data and dash camera footage from that morning." That was the moment everything changed. Marcus had spent weeks building a story around a few photographs. Laura had spent that same time finding the one thing he couldn't argue with: data. The city had tracking systems installed on their snow removal vehicles. Every route was recorded. Every movement was documented. The speed, the location, even the position of the plow blade. The judge approved the footage being shown, and a small screen was brought forward. I remember watching Marcus lean back in his chair. For the first time that day, he didn't look like someone who knew exactly what was going to happen. He looked uncertain. The video started, and suddenly we were watching that morning from the perspective of the snowplow driver. The headlights moved through the dark street around 3 in the morning. Snow was still falling heavily. The plow moved slowly down the road, clearing a path for everyone in the neighborhood. Then, right in front of Marcus's house, the blade hit a frozen manhole cover hidden under the snow. The truck shook. The blade bounced. The vehicle shifted slightly to the side, scraping along the curb and tearing into the edge of the grass exactly where the damage had happened. The timestamp appeared on the screen. 2:57 a.m. Then came the detail that completely destroyed Marcus's argument. My driveway was visible in the background. My SUV was there, parked, covered in snow, completely untouched. My vehicle had never been near the street. Not once. The room stayed quiet as everyone watched the evidence prove what I had been saying from the beginning. It wasn't my car. It was the plow. And for the first time since this started, Marcus had no explanation left. For a few seconds after that video ended, nobody in the courtroom said a word. And, honestly, that silence was louder than any argument Marcus could have made. The screen had shown everything. Not an opinion. Not a guess. Not a neighbor's memory from a stressful morning after a snowstorm. Just fact. The snowplow came down the street at 2:57 in the morning. The blade hit the frozen manhole cover. The truck shifted. The curb was damaged. The grass was torn. And my vehicle never left my driveway. It was all there, recorded, timestamped. Impossible to twist into something else. I remember looking over at Marcus, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I saw something different on his face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't confidence. It was uncertainty. Because when someone spends weeks believing they control the story, it is a strange feeling when the story suddenly belongs to the truth. Marcus had walked into that courtroom carrying the same attitude he had carried to my front porch. He believed that if he spoke with enough confidence, if he pointed hard enough at the pictures, if he repeated the same accusation enough times, people would eventually accept it. But the problem with facts is that they don't need confidence. They don't need a performance. They don't need someone to sell them. They just sit there and wait. The judge looked through the evidence again, slowly turning each page, reviewing the GPS records and the footage one more time. Then she looked up. "Mr. Bell, the evidence presented today does not support your claim." Her voice was calm, but everyone in that room understood what she meant. The case was over. My attorney quietly gathered her papers while Marcus sat there completely still. The same man who had shown up at my house demanding $1,800 now had nothing to say. Then the judge added one more thing. She explained that filing a claim based on information that turned out to be false could have consequences, and he was fortunate that the court was choosing not to pursue further action at that time. It wasn't a dramatic movie scene where someone gets dragged away or everyone applauds. Real life rarely works like that. Sometimes the most satisfying moments are much quieter. Sometimes justice is simply watching someone realize they can't rewrite reality anymore. After the hearing ended, I walked outside into the cold air and just stood there for a moment. I expected to feel angry. I expected to feel some kind of victory. But honestly, what I felt was mostly relief, because the hardest part of the whole situation was never the money. It wasn't even the lawsuit. It was the feeling of having someone look me in the eyes and confidently accuse me of something I didn't do. There's something unsettling about being treated like the villain in a story where you know you did nothing wrong. It makes you question things. It makes you wonder how often people believe the loudest person instead of the person telling the truth. On the drive home, I thought about that morning when Marcus stood on my porch holding those pictures. I kept thinking about how quickly he had decided I was responsible. He never asked what happened. He never looked for another explanation. He never considered that maybe the storm itself had caused the damage. He had already chosen his answer before he even knocked on my door. And maybe that was the real problem. Not the broken curb. Not the torn grass. The real problem was that he needed someone to blame more than he needed the truth. A few days after the hearing, the city crew came out to repair the damage in front of Marcus's driveway. I happened to be outside when they arrived, and one of the workers recognized the address from the paperwork. He laughed a little and said, "This is the spot where the Plow lost a fight with the street." Huh? I smiled because at that point I had heard the story so many times it almost felt unreal. The workers fixed the curb, replaced the damaged section of grass, and cleaned everything up. They weren't interested in the neighborhood drama. To them, it was just another repair job after a bad storm. And maybe that was another lesson I learned from all of this. The world keeps moving. People argue, people blame, people create these huge battles in their minds. But eventually the facts catch up and everyone has to deal with what actually happened. After the repairs were finished, I noticed something interesting. The neighbors started talking more openly about the situation. Not in a cruel way, but because everyone had their own opinion. Some people said Marcus deserved to pay for wasting everyone's time. Others said he probably embarrassed himself enough already. A few people even defended him, saying maybe he really believed my car was responsible when he first saw the damage. And I understood that point. Mistakes happen. People jump to conclusions. We all have moments where we are wrong. But there is a big difference between making a mistake and refusing to accept the truth after the evidence is right in front of you. That's the part that bothered me the most. Not that Marcus was wrong. Everyone is wrong sometimes. It was that he was willing to turn his assumption into a legal claim and make someone else carry the consequences of his mistake. About a month later, I saw Marcus outside near his driveway. He was looking at the repaired curb, almost like he was inspecting the work. For a second, I thought about walking over. I thought about asking him if he still believed my car caused the damage. I thought about reminding him how certain he had been that day. But then I realized something. I didn't need that conversation anymore. The evidence had already spoken. So instead of arguing, I went back inside, printed a copy of the city's repair invoice, and mailed it to him. No angry message, no insults, no dramatic speech. Just one piece of paper showing what actually happened. Because sometimes the best response isn't saying more. Sometimes the best response is letting someone sit quietly with the facts. I never wanted a fight with Marcus. I still don't. We live in the same neighborhood. We still pass each other from time to time. But there is a difference between avoiding conflict and allowing someone to walk over you. I believe in being reasonable. I believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt. But I also believe that when someone chooses to drag you into a battle, you have every right to defend yourself with the truth. And that entire experience changed the way I look at disagreements. Before this happened, I thought the truth always won because people naturally cared about fairness. Now I know that isn't always true. Sometimes the truth needs someone willing to stand up for it. Sometimes facts need a voice. Sometimes you have to be patient enough to let the evidence catch up with the person who rushed to judgment. And maybe that's why the story still gets people talking. Because almost everyone has experienced some version of it. Maybe not a snowplow and a damaged curb, but a moment where someone made an assumption, pointed a finger, and decided they already knew the whole story. So, I want to know what you think. Was Marcus just a frustrated homeowner who made a bad assumption after a stressful storm? Or did he cross a line when he turned that assumption into a legal accusation? If you were in my position, would you have fought back the same way? Or would you have tried to settle things privately before it reached court? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Because these everyday conflicts reveal a lot about how people handle being wrong. And if you enjoyed this story, share it with someone who believes that facts still matter. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who has been telling the truth all along.